Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Invincible, Season 3, Episode 6. A great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. It's a really sad episode. It wasn't until we rewound and kind of saw we were at Chicago, and I didn't recognize Jessica and Gretchen until it got a little further in, and before it happens, I was like, oh my god, right, because that's why they recapped the Chicago incident in the recap at the beginning. It's like, that's the mom and daughter he tried to save specifically. That was the people he specifically went out of his way trying to save. He's trying to stop that whole building from falling. There was probably other people in there too, but still. And it's just like that moment there, like, obviously shook Mark to his core. In general, everything that went down. Obviously, your father using you to pile through train killing hundreds of people, that's also going to, like, really mess you up. But I thought it was just the moment we got introduced to Scott and he's super powered. I was like, I see where this is going. And that's it. It's so interesting because I think probably a lot of superhero stuff covered this, but obviously it being Prime Video, you think of the parallels of like the whole collateral damage conversation in The Boys versus Invincible. Because at least in Invincible, you feel like, oh man, it sucks, but you don't blame Mark. Whereas like in The Boys, you're like, oh, heroes suck in that universe. They're terrible people. They don't care about people. So collateral damage in that universe is very different, than collateral damage caused by heroes in this situation. And once again, it wasn't Mark's fault. He tried to stop his dad. He just wasn't strong enough to stop his dad. And that guilt rocked him, and that stayed with him. The guilt of feeling like he wasn't, he really went through it because he started, kind of internalizing it and obviously trying to prove not only to other people, but prove to himself, I'm not my dad. I'm not going to be this mass murdering, genocidal maniac, And it is that thing of, and I even love that Mark touches on it this episode, that this whole situation opened his eyes because he's like, not until they actually got to the memorial, he was like, I thought about the people that died, but it never really hit home because it is a thing of, people died, but when you're seeing the names of people, when you're seeing the people, loved ones there crying, it changes things a little bit more when it comes to that. Like the first time he's ever really had to have like a fate, like kind of come to terms with that was like when they went to the previous Guardians of the Globes funeral in episode 3 of season 1. Like that was like the closest that's happened, but obviously this is on a crazy scale because I think the exact number was when it like 2,321, I think it's 2,000 plus deaths in that situation. And it's just like I said, it's that thing of like, it's bad and you recognize it's bad, but it doesn't fully hit you. I guess you could look at it as almost a little bit of a disassociation to some extent, but yeah, it was a real eye-opening situation. I kept thinking the entire time the episode was playing out too. I kept being like, I was like, it does feel like I might recognize Scott's voice, but I couldn't really place it. It's not till like about 20 minutes into the episode, hearing his voice more, I was like, is that Aaron Paul? And it totally is. Like, the more I heard it more, I was like, oh, that sounds like Aaron Paul. But yeah, it's sad because he tried to go the legal route. He was like, why are there no charges being heralded against Invincible for what he did? And it's like, it's like, first and foremost, it's like there are no human laws in place that kind of really deal with the collateral damage of like a superhero trying to stop someone from doing something. And it's like if you look at all the evidence, you can see that Mark was trying, but I think once you have your preconceived notions of he didn't do enough, like was he really fighting back because this was his dad? It's like, because you see that moment where Mark's paused, like when his dad's holding him up against the train, and then Mark's panicking trying to get free of his dad. Once again, his dad is superiorly stronger than him. He couldn't do anything. But from an outside perspective, it's like, did you really try? Did you really do enough? And it's just, you didn't. Because if you did, there wouldn't have been nearly as much death. But it's also the thing, like so many people lost their lives, but it is just, Scott's story is just one of many, obviously. He just happened to be the person that had the power. Who knows? There might have been other people out there who feel the exact same way that Scott did, but who knows? There's probably a good chunk of people who don't blame Invincible, but you can also understand people who do. It's just, it's such a conflicting situation where you're just like, you understand that hurt and pain. And it's also like, you can't take it out on Omni-Man. He hasn't been on Earth since the Chicago incident, Regardless of that all, it's still the thing of he He left, and Mark is the only one here to kind of take the brunt of your anger. So he becomes like the focal point, and you're just driven by revenge. He got a job at the GDA just to kind of be able to work around it. I mean, like, that's his dedication, because he couldn't find any other means to kind of go after Invincible. And I think he was looking for means to, it's like, well, if no one's going to bring him the justice, I will. Because Mark says it himself, where he's like, I think Cecil kind of protected me from like the reality of the situation. Yes, he's dabbled with the reality of, oh, like death and collateral damage, like when the Flaxlands attacked in episode 2. Sure, but it's a little different when you're kind of used as the weapon. Like that was just them attacking, and that was an invasion, and you're trying to do everything. It's a different thing when it's your own dad, like, and you fighting that causes damage, and death and destruction. So it's a different situation. But Cecil did like cover him from that, shield him from that. But he's also like, maybe we shouldn't be, maybe our eyes should be wide open to the collateral damage that, because for him it's like later on it's like, it was my fault, and anything that Scott does now, like if he hurts anyone, that isn't that also my fault too? And Eve can't really say anything because I think she sees where Mark's coming from, and it's also like, me saying it's not your fault isn't going to alleviate what you're feeling. I can try and be, because also I think it's a situation where it's like you're just trying to be supportive, where you're like, I'm going to listen, because nothing I say can alleviate that thing. I can't stop you from feeling the way you're feeling. All I can do is try to be understanding and try to ease your heart. But it's just like, you're also having to look at from your perspective of, can I really, if I put myself in Mark's shoes, like, would I say anything differently? Would I feel any differently? So that's kind of that thing where just like Eve didn't have anything to say after that. And it's just a sad situation of like, someone driven by revenge. I mean, once again, you lost your family. He even talks about it. Gretchen was like, not Gretchen, Jessica. He's like, Jessica raised me. She was my sister, but she raised me, I think, like after her parents died. So she was like, she meant the world to him. And it's like, yeah, this is my little niece too. It's the only family I have outside of my wife and my own child. And it's just like, we were such a tight-knit family. And it's not just him who felt the loss. His wife, Becky, was all about it too, voiced by Kate Mara. I didn't recognize her voice immediately, but I'm like, if I probably went back, I'd probably hear it a little more. But yeah. But she was all about the revenge too, because it wasn't just him that lost family. She lost family in that exchange too. When she lost Gretchen and Jessica, like that hit her just as much as it hit Scott. So it's just a sad and depressing situation. But his desperation to try and get Mark out, he uses the technology to basically amplify his powers, because he can like draw in energy and create electricity. But basically he kind of did what like the Black Panther suit does in the MCU. I don't know if it works like this in the comics or not. It might not, but at least in the MCU, basically every blow that it takes, you can build up kinetic energy and release it. And that's what he does. Like the more power, like every time he gets hit, he's able to build up that energy and store it, and then kind of release it and use it as need be. And so he's trying to draw out Invincible, but Mark initially turns off the TV when he's about to call out Invincible, because Mark is like, right, there's plenty of other heroes that can handle it. It seems very irresponsible, but it's like, right, like that's why there's other heroes in the world. Like, not everything has to be you. You want to make time for your friends. It's William's birthday. He's crushing you at bowling. You're out with your ex, because Amber shows up with her boyfriend Kyle, but him and Mark hit it off because they're both big fans of Seance Dog. So there's that. And it seems like they're good, and it's like, right, it's their first hangout since the breakup. So, but it seems like everything was cool and chill. But Shapesmith showed up, and he's like, oh, like, you don't know who I am? And literally he looks around at everyone. He's like, oh, you don't know? He's like, I'm Shapesmith, blah 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 blah. I never knew that. I mean, it makes sense. I never thought about the fact that he makes his own costume from his sales of like being a Martian shapeshifter. Like, I don't know why it never clicked in my head. Like, oh, of course you made, like, your suit isn't just like made. You make your suit out of your own like shapeshifting ability. But yeah, he lands some blows against Scott, who's going by Powerplex, but it doesn't. Ultimately he gets knocked down, but then he starts feeling bad because he's like, "Whoa, I didn't mean to kill him. You saw that. I tried not to." it's one of those situations where it's like trying to be the good guy, you inadvertently become the bad guy because you're starting to scare people around you. And he takes off and he wants to kind of give up because he's like, oh my god, the GDA is going to come after me. But it's like, well, they didn't follow you here, so it's going to be okay. You're going to Jessica's like, you have to not Jessica, sorry, Becky is like, you have to see this through. It's up to you to you have to, for your family's sake, bring, because I think it was initially it was like a bring Mark to justice, make him face justice for what he's done, what him and his father did. It wasn't initially like, oh, I'm going to kill him, but I think it eventually became that. Obviously, well, the ending tying all this into like a Engstrom Levy situation where it's like, oh, let me, that's a little bit of a different situation. Mark never did anything to that Engstrom, but that Engstrom was feeding off of, the memories and experiences of every other Engstrom throughout the multiverse. So, and in those universes, Mark was bad and very, very evil person who killed a lot of people, especially people close to Engstrom in a lot of worlds. It's the thing of, did he always go after Engstrom specifically, or was it just always a happenstance of you unluckily always had run-ins, other versions of you out in the multiverse always were unlucky and ended up just being the victims of Mark? I mean, to be fair, Mark was evil, so everyone was a victim, so it was just probably like a numbers game, or maybe it did seem like some cases he did specifically go after Engstrom, so who knows? But either way, drawing back that parallel of like, in that case, should Mark be held responsible for everything all the other Marks did? In this case, should Mark be held responsible for his role in what happened with his dad, even though he was trying to defend and save people's lives? His dad was just stronger than him and used him to cause as much havoc and pain as possible, because it was meant to be a lesson to teach Mark, like, oh, like, look at these insignificant creatures, but also like to break Mark's spirit at the same time. So should he be? I say no, but I understand, once again, Scott's hate and his family's hate, but also Mark's guilt over the situation. So the second time Scott showed up, it was at the memorial, and ultimately Eve stepped in and stopped him, because she didn't have to, she's like, as long as I don't hit you, I know how she immediately is like, I know how your powers work. If I hit you, you just get stronger, so I'll just have to not directly hit you. So it was a little easy for her to kind of play keep away and eventually like immobilize him for like the Guardians to show up and deal with him. It's interesting too, because tying this all in, kind of going to the Omni-Man of it all, is obviously Oliver's still getting trained, going up against the Elephant. He wants to go up against some tougher people. But then he ultimately asks the question of, like, will people ever forgive Dad? And it's like, well, Dad did what he did. And it's like, yeah, but like, is he always going to be a villain? And it's like, yeah, to some people, yes. There is no forgiving what he did. He can't, because Oliver tried to say, like, well, Dad saved a lot of people too, right? So shouldn't that count? And for Mark, it's like, yeah, Dad probably did save more people than he killed, but it doesn't cancel it out. All the good you do doesn't make it doesn't even out. Like, oh, you saved 10,000 people, so, knock off of, 2,000 plus, that's still, you're up 8,000, so it doesn't work like that. But for Oliver, he's like, because of being a Thraxan, he's able to remember a lot from being an infant. He remembers his mom, her hugs. He remembers his dad flying him around and like singing to him. So it's like he remembers things. That's why he's also very attached to, like, he sees that side of Nolan. And even Mark was like, yeah, I get it. Like, there's this side of Dad where he was a great dad to both of us, but then there was also Dad, the Viltrumite, who would kill people and ready to conquer. And even Oliver's like, which side of Dad is real? And it's like, initially, I'd say the Viltrumite side of him was the real him, but he has grown a conscience now, but it's still like who gives a shit? It doesn't erase the terrible things you've done and the people you left, what you did to Debbie, what you did to Mark. Because even, because Mark didn't want to show up at the memorial because he didn't believe, like, right, should I really be there? It feels wrong to be there. But even Eve said it herself, you are a victim. Your dad nearly killed you. He traumatized you and used you to kill people. So it's like, yeah, you are, it's not, no, you don't want to outwardly say that, but like, yeah, like honestly, Mark is just as much, not just as much of a victim, but he is a victim in all of that situation as well. Not just an emotional turmoil of your entire life is turned upside down, everything you known is a lie, but it's also just like, once again, your dad traumatizing you and using you as a means to kill people. So I do also appreciate the Paul of it all, where they're just like, they're talking about everything, and Eve going to college and doing great, and she's like, well, Debbie being like, well, I got to hear about somebody's college life considering Mark dropped out, so she's kind of living vicariously instead of vicariously living through having vicariously living Mark's college experience through Eve in a way. And then Paul's trying to make a comparison of like, oh yeah, your reputation, and oh yeah, your job that you and Eve started. He's like, I get it. He's like, yeah, like I basically, when I was selling homes, like I basically went into territories where other people were at, and I basically, put my name out there and kind of make everyone back away. And Paul felt stupid. He was like, I regretted it the moment it left my mouth. I mean, who am I to compare selling houses to saving the world? He just feels like he can't really compare and connect. It's like, how do I even connect and compare with your truth? Because he's like, yeah, I like being with you, Debbie. I want to be with you, but I just don't know. But for Debbie, it's like, you don't need to be their father. No one's asking you to step in. You don't have to be, you're not the stepdad. You're the dad who stepped up. Like, it's not necessarily dad, but it's like just being there is enough in its own right. And it's also like, you make your mom happy. And for Mark, that's plenty in its own right. Like, that already is enough to, be okay with everything, where it's like, my mom has someone and she deserves to have someone after everything she's been through. And as long as you make her happy, that's all that matters to him. So Paul trying to figure this whole thing out. And I love when they went to the memorial. I love it. He's like, are we going to teleport? Because I don't think I can handle that. It's like, don't worry, we're taking the car. He's like, oh, thank God. But he's like, wait, we're supposed to have left 30 minutes ago. We're kind of behind schedule. He's like, what does that mean? And it's like, Mark's flying the car there, and he's just freaking out. And Oliver's flying all around, and Mark's trying to chase him while carrying the car. And Paul's like, Oliver, can you please? And then Debbie looks at him like, come on, get in the car. He's like, oh, fine. So I just got to get some lighthearted moments throughout this situation. But continuing on, after getting caught, Scott, or Powerplex, ended up escaping again, and he went to his wife, and they were going to go on the run. It's like, right, the GDA caught him this time. There's no escaping. But for her, it's like, well, we could pull one more plan, and that was basically to draw Invincible in. She's going to play, her and their child were going to play hostage to all this. You're like, oh boy, this is not going to end well. Like, there was multiple ways this could end. All of them were going to be terrible, and we got one of the terrible endings, but we'll get to that in a second. But Mark is he initially tried to talk to Donald to try and get some info about Scott and everything, because he wanted to talk to Scott, but that's before they found out Scott had escaped. And it's just because he wanted to try and make things as right as possible, about the whole situation. But I mean, it's like, how much can you really do? How can you right the ship? Like, there is no making this right necessarily, And so ultimately, Mark ends up confronting Scott, and they battle it out. But Mark doesn't want to fight him. He tries to apologize. He's like, I know this is where Gresham and Jessica were. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for your loss. But obviously, all that's going to do is just fuel Scott more. And so they fight more, and he's planning on killing Mark. Obviously, with your powers, it's not going to be the easiest thing to kill Mark, despite like him kind of going full throttle. He'd probably have to build up a crap ton of energy to even remotely kill Mark. But it's like, yeah, he tries electrocuting Mark, and it doesn't work. And that was after Mark tried to save his wife, but she spit in his face and called him like a monster and a murderer. Because like Mark didn't know, because I guess he didn't look into the files. He knew like, oh, you have a wife. Well, I don't know if they really dug into him having a wife and child. I think they already did. I think Donald explained it, but I don't think Mark didn't piece it together. That's who this was. And it's kind of a moot point, because when he did it, he ended up when Scott attacked, he killed his wife and child in the process. You're like, that's always the thing they say about like when you're going out for revenge. Dig two graves, one for the person you're trying to kill and for yourself, because it will always end that way. You will probably end up suffering the most on your path for revenge, and Scott did. Like unintentionally, he ended up killing his wife and child. To be fair, they were just like, well, not this child. His child was innocent, but it's still the thing of they were the ones that were all about this. They could have walked away, but they chose not to. They kept being like, no, we'll do this. I mean, in fact, he wanted to walk away multiple times. His wife is the one that convinced him, like, no, we have to see this through, because if you don't, you'll never have any closure. And that's the sad thing. Once again, this was not Mark's fault. But Mark is going to feel like every time I turn around trying to make things right, I just made it worse, you know? So, and he wanted to try and make sure that no one else got hurt, and someone did. But that's not your fault. The dude was trying to kill you. You literally wanted to get his wife and child out of there, but both of them stopped you from doing. So it's like, what can you do? All it does is just make Mark drown more and more in his own guilt, believing the worst about himself, you know? I mean, I think, we're talking about this coming off the heels of all the stuff about his dad, all the stuff with Chicago, all the stuff, like, with the whole Immortal situation from episode 4, where he finds out, like, oh, yo, this is me in the future ended up leaving the Immortal in charge, and all the death and destruction and enslavement that took place afterwards. It's like, it's one thing after another. And once again, like, reality hitting Mark in this way, especially after, like, he's separated from Cecil, and it's kind of making him realizing, like, a lot that Cecil does, and kind of what Cecil shielded him from. It's a lot to kind of handle in the aftermath of kind of like the moment you go out on your own is when life decides to really bitch slap you. So it's rough. And no matter, like, Scott just popped off at the end, and Mark tries to contain his power, so he ends up absorbing a lot of the hit. And I guess, I don't know if it reverberated to Scott or not, but it seemed like it all went into Mark. But once again, it wasn't enough to kill him. And so he's locked up, and Mark's just like, I remember Gretchen and Jessica, and I'm so sorry. He admits, like, after what happened, I couldn't kind of live with what I did. So he's like, I buried those feelings. And he's like, I don't think that was the right thing to do. But he's trying to say, like, I learned from this situation so that would never happen again, if that's any comfort. But he's like, comfort? So many people died. My wife and daughter died. My sister and my niece died, and you think it's going to bring me some comfort because what, you feel sorry now? But he's like, no, that's not what he's like, I will get out of here and I will come after you, And it's just like, for Mark, once again, there's nothing you can say. There's nothing you can do to change his mind. And it's just that guilt is rocking and rattling Mark. And once again, nothing anyone else can say will kind of alleviate that guilt, because for him, it's like, it's a hard lesson you kind of have to learn as a superhero. And then we see at the end, it is Engstrom watching him, as we kind of found out previously. But it does seem like it is the same Engstrom he believed himself to kill, which, one, it's kind of interesting. The one person you kind of lost control and killed, or at least thought you killed, not unless this is a multiverse, like, time travel thing of, like, I'm curious how it worked. How did Engstrom, well, because he does have like, he could easily get off. I was about to say, like, how did he get off of that? Where it was like, well, like, I guess some remnants of him was still around after Mark pummeled him, because he does have a scar on his head, probably from, like, his skull being splattered open, considering all that was there when Mark beat the ever-living shit out of him. But it's like, yeah, because Engstrom is the only, like, that Engstrom Levy is supposed to be, maybe not at least from what we know of the multiverse, it seems like he's the only Engstrom that has that power. They kind of stressed that point last season. He's the only one amongst all the Engstrom levies that had that ability. And then on top of that, like, he's now gathered every other Mark in the multiverse, all the evil Marks. I don't know. How do you convince them to join your side in this? How do you convince them? I mean, it's like convincing all these other evil Marks to work with each other. I'm curious. But I'm curious if his plan is, I'm going to try and destroy Invincible's reputation by having all these evil Invincibles do all this catastrophic, terrible stuff, framing him like that. I wonder if that's going to be the point. It's kind of like, oh, the enemy of my enemy is my enemy. I mean, that's because I'm like, why are these other Marks motivated to try and kill this Mark or frame him or do whatever? Because I guess maybe their worlds no longer exist, but Mark's world is here, the Conqueror. Not less, it could always be the situation that's, because Engstrom has visited multiple universes, so he could have taken some of the GDA approach where Cecil brainwashes people and makes them good guys. It could be a situation where he applied that to Mark and maybe that's why all those marks are potentially serving Engstrom. Maybe. And speaking of that, I wonder will we see Scott pop back up in the same vein where Mark is going to see Cecil do, because they were making a whole point of they can't take those devices out of Scott, that he has to live with them forever, and they're going to try and rehabilitate him just like they kind of did the others, like Darkwing Jr. and stuff like that. So yeah, that's just kind of very sad and heavy an episode. Like I said, it just makes you feel conflicted because, like, once again, it's like you side with Mark, but you also you can understand and sympathize where Scott and his family were coming from, and it's just like, once again, the tragedy of revenge, like, you know, because sometimes it's never going to be you who just pays the price, because he's the one that's still alive. It's his wife and child that are going now too. So that's a tragedy of it all. So we'll see what the aftermath of that all looks like. Some other elements to the episode. We catch up with Monster Girl and Rudy. Well, Amanda and Rudy. And Rudy has perfected his technology of what he's working on. When he was kind of getting cagey when Amanda was like, oh, what's that you were? He's like, whoa, don't worry about it. I was like, it had to be related to her not being able to age anymore. And so he created like a special belt. Well, it's a material and stuff he was working on that he's like, well, it needed to take on the form of something like a sash or a belt. So I went with a belt. And it seems to work. We'll see whether it sticks around. I'm curious if you go back to that episode 20 years in the future where I believe Monster Girl was there, but it could have been someone else. I don't fully remember. I believe Monster Girl was there. I can't remember in season 2 if she had a belt on or not. Like the one from like 20 years in the future that showed up with future Eve. I don't remember, because it's like that could probably, like, if you go back to that scene, I'm curious in the season 2 finale and see if she had a belt on. I want to say it was still her, but I know the squad was a little different. It wasn't a 1-to-1 to where the Guardians are now. That's why, because I remember Bulletproof was there, and obviously Rex was inside of Robot, because Rudy wasn't there. So who knows if what that means. Once again, that's also a future where things went differently. That's, you know, so that has to be considered as well. But it seems like Amanda is cured for now. We'll see if there's going to be any long-lasting resorts. But I thought it was sweet that Rudy's trying to be like, well, I want you to know I'm not trying to fix you. If you don't want this, then... And she's like, no, thank you. I think it's for her. The thing is, her issue with last season was Rudy. She felt like Rudy was trying to fix her, like she was broken. He misspoke, but it's like, no, like, as long, like, she doesn't want that just to be the thing that defines her. But for him, it's like, I want to help you. Like, the fact is, I was lucky enough to be in a body where I can grow up and kind of make up for my circumstances in my previous life. But you, like, you're stuck in a situation, you're getting younger. Hell, even changing for the few seconds that she did, like, cost her 24 hours. Where you're like, Jesus, it's like that small amount cost her that's a significant amount of time considering everything. But now I guess going forward, she'll be able to regularly age. I thought it was interesting too how he explained it, because basically he's like, the curse basically is an imperfect spell or whatever, because he's like, I don't know if it was by design or whether that's just how it is. But basically, when she transforms, it takes a copy of her temporal, like, state, and then when she reverts back to human, it doesn't fully, like, it doesn't basically pace the full temporal energy, and so she ends up losing time. Now this whole thing is to kind of basically, this is supposed to be a more perfected version of that, where it's like it takes samples of that temporal energy and basically forces the curse to be like, oh, this is the temporal energy we're supposed to be copying fully, and it does. So, like I said, we'll see if there's any long-lasting effects afterwards. But Ray watches this sequence and kind of, I think for her, it's like, oh, she's happy they're having their happily ever after, that things are working out for them. But she goes to talk to Rex. She's like, yo, we were catching a vibe last episode, right? She's like, yeah, but that's not what I'm here to talk about. She wants to leave. Understandably, it's like, the superhero thing's a lot, and just in general, but especially going through what she went through. She almost died. Like, that isn't something you can quite shake, you know? And it once again, it's the point she tried to stress to Kate in episode 2. Is like, we got one life, and so, yes, it sucks you've died multiple times, but it's like, it's a multi-death from all your duplicates versus like, no, I die and it's true death, you know? And I could have died and my body was broken and mangled. It's like, it's a lot understandable why she wants to walk away. But it's interesting too when we hear Rex's perspective, because he likes her too, but he feels like, why now? He's like, we're going to be nobody. She's like, I'd rather be a nobody than die. Like, we almost died. You took a bullet to the head. My body was broken, took months to kind of like have like stuff on the inside, like kind of like put my bones back into place. I don't want to wait around until we like die, get close to dying again, because it will happen and we might not get lucky enough. We won't get lucky enough again. We escaped the Reaper this time. We won't again, you know? So that's just that should we really have to sacrifice our own lives just for sacrificing your own life for other people's happiness? And that's the coin toss of like being a hero. And Rex is talking, because she's like, don't we deserve to be happy? And Rex like, I'm not going to be happy. I can't be happy. And we find out and like I said, real interesting insight to Rex. He's like, my real last name is Sloan. You know how I got that name? It was the name given to me by the government when my parents sold me. The fact is that when the government got me and they did what they did to me, not realizing, like, I wondered, did he have any powers at all and the government expanded upon it, or was he just straight up a normal kid and then got experimented on and got all his powers? I'm curious. Like, we know they were responsible, but we don't really know to what degree they're responsible. I mean, either situation sucks, whether it's like you had a sparking of ability and they expanded upon it, or whether they full on gave you all the powers that you got. Either way, it sucks. But for him, it's like, when they took him in and experimented on him, they erased everything about who he was. Rexplode is all that he is. It's kind of all I've ever been. It's all I ever will be. I am no one outside of that. So no longer being Rexplode. It's like basically giving up on all that I am and all that I've known. And that's a lot, because it's like, yeah, my identity, all that I am in this world. Like, Mark can be Mark Grayson outside of Invincible. Eve can be Samantha Wilkins outside of being Adam Eve. You know, everyone else has those benefits. In some cases, some. In some other cases, no. But it's like, for him, it's like they're one and the same. So you ask me to walk away from Rexplode, it's like walking away from everything that I am, who I am. And I just, that especially because it's like, this is all that I've known for so much of my life. But for Ray, it's still a thing of, I gotta go. And he's like, I understand. And they kiss. So, I mean, but at least Ray's alive, but there's always a thing of, you walk away, you could always get dragged back in, or maybe Rex will eventually decide to quit. Maybe this has something to do with, plays into it. Once again, different time, but, he was in Rudy's robot suit for some reason, so who knows? We don't have an answer for what that was, so maybe that still can play into this timeline of what could end up happening to Rex's future, so a lot of questions on that front. Some very, very interesting developments. Obviously, the next episode is the penultimate episode of the season, so it's going to be interesting to see, because I'm assuming we're picking up with a thread where this episode it left off with the Angstrom stuff and carrying that over. Maybe the entire next episode revolves around that. I don't know, especially because we're going to be dealing with the aftermath of like this whole situation with Scott, and how Mark responds to it is definitely going to be interesting. But yeah. That's really all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.